all you really need to know is demand increasing? And everywhere you look, that answer has to be yes. So when you've got a fixed supply and look around and everywhere you turn, you see demand is increasing, you know that results in number go up. When we see a big drop, we don't care. We don't give a shit. We're doubling down on the price. We're looking under the couch for the spare change, trying to see if we can buy the dip, because we know what this thing is, and we know eventually you zoom back out, you adjust your time horizon, you know that it will improve your lifestyle dramatically. Bitcoin is the only currency globally where real estate's going down. If I was going to sell Bitcoin, all I would want to do is buy more Bitcoin. But when I get more fiat, I look around, I go, what am I going to do with this fiat? Where do I want to park this? Where is going to perform best? And it's Bitcoin every single time. Diminishing returns? No, I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to just continue to see an acceleration of adoption. We finally fix the money. It's finite, it's durable, it's portable. All of those things Bitcoin solves to a T.
What do you expect for this year, like 2025? Why is Bitcoin important for 2025? What do you expect for Bitcoin this year?
Well, what an awesome question. I think all bets are off this year. I quite often sit here to myself thinking and talk to friends and talk to other Bitcoiners in the space, and there's a real lot of unknowns. One thing I think we can all sort of settle on is that we expect number go up, right? And the thesis really for me, I just keep coming back down to fundamentals, is when you have a finite supply of something, when you have any market good, right? The price for a market good's always met at the equilibrium between the supply and the demand. And with the Bitcoin thesis, it's really quite simple. You don't have to be really thinking about what's happening in the space, if Trump's going to sign an executive order day one, any of this thing. All you really need to know is you peel back the layers and you go, is demand increasing? And everywhere you look, that answer has to be yes. And we know the issuance rate. So when you've got a fixed supply, known issuance rate to a market cap, and look around and everywhere you turn, you see demand is increasing, you know that results in number go up.
And I think the point of us never ever had to we never had digital scarce money that was globally available, that everyone can have, and everyone has a reason to adopt this thing. So demand is basically unlimited, and supply is strictly scarce, and it's capped, and it's not able to widen out. And this combination we never had anywhere comparable in the history. We had gold, but that's completely different, because when you have a higher price, you have an incentive to dig out more gold, so you expand the gold supply with that. So there's some controls in there. You can also manipulate gold a little bit easier, the price, than you can do with Bitcoin. So there are a lot of things that we just don't know. Like that's why I'm always like, if someone says to me like, oh, the Bitcoin price will be that or that, I'm like, yeah, maybe. Like, I have no clue. Like I can believe you. I can also not believe you. I definitely cannot prove you anything. I cannot say like, you are wrong. I could just say like, I don't know if you're right. So I think all bets are off kind of puts it perfectly. And you also like as an electrical engineer, you are, right? You have the background. How did this shape your understanding of Bitcoin?
Oh, deeply, actually. Having a bit of a technical background, I tried to break it. So when I first discovered Bitcoin, I sort of got the thesis from a value investing lens, right? So I got the gold thesis and I got the Bitcoin thesis pretty quickly, in and around money, scarce assets, what performs in these environments of high inflation, low interest rates. Scarce assets, you want to hold things that they can't print out of thin air. So I sort of stumbled across Bitcoin, and then being technically minded and also in that space, like knew a little bit of coding. I'm not going to say I'm a prolific coder by any stretch of the imagination, but knew enough to be dangerous, and stumbled across Bitcoin and thought, well, this can't be right. Like, it's got to be hacked. It's got to be, there's got to be weaknesses. There's got to be attack vectors. And so dug pretty deep down the rabbit hole in terms of the technical, just to really get a deep understanding of what it was. Because, like I said, I tried to find the flaw, tried to find where it could be broken or co-opted or hacked or copied, and then when you start to come down that thesis, obviously discover crypto, go down a bit of that rabbit hole, and then realize, come back to full circle, back to Bitcoin, really understanding that there was only really one truly scarce, truly decentralized money. Blockchains are very inefficient databases. They do one thing and they do one thing very well, and that's money, and you only need one money. It's Gresham's law. All, the number one money will win out in the end. So it set me up really well, I'd say, having that technical background. It set me up really well to receive the message and receive it fairly quickly. So I'm only class of 2020, but I fell down that rabbit hole really hard, really quickly, and didn't take me long to get myself in a position where I was comfortable having decent exposure to it. Being a married fellow with kids, I still took it from what I would consider a pretty risk adverse way. I had to be sure, right? But what that allowed me to do is having that deep understanding also then led to pretty quick conviction in and around the asset. And I think that's really important for people coming into the space who are dabbling on the side, like with this volatility, with big market swings in that underlying price performance in US dollar terms or Aussie dollar terms, whatever your denomination is, to stomach that at size, to have decent exposure to that and putting yourself out there financially, to be able to stomach that volatility, you really need that conviction. You need to understand what's under the hood. You need to understand how it works, because when you have these big drawdowns, this is why us psychotic Bitcoiners, when we see a big drop, we don't care. We don't give a shit. We're doubling down on the price. We're looking under the couch for the spare change, trying to see if we can buy the dip, because we know what this thing is, and we know eventually you zoom back out, you adjust your time horizon, you know that it will improve your lifestyle dramatically if all you have to do is hodl and sit there and wait.
I now get, this might be crazy, but I now get anxiety when Bitcoin goes up. Because I get most of my income nowadays paid in Bitcoin. And it's fixated on an euro unit of account. So if Bitcoin goes up, I just get less Bitcoin. It's not that I get a fixed amount of Bitcoin. I get a fixed amount of euros, and that paid in Bitcoin. So when I see a price rising and it's like, I get paid in 10 days, and it's like, the price was 93, now it's 102. Like, oh shit, like I really get anxiety when the Bitcoin price goes up. If it goes down, I'm like, is there some money coming in? It's like, do I need, is that something, where can I push money in? So like, and when I explain to you, you probably understand that. But if I explain it to someone else in my family or something like that, they're like why? Like, you're stacking since 2020, you're all in since 2021, actually. And I still get anxiety when it goes up, because I still have this feeling like, I don't have enough. Like I need so much more. I'm not even close to my stacking goal. And I think there's never an end to the stacking, I feel like.
Yeah, I think people, often say, how much money have you made out of Bitcoin? And it's like, well, Bitcoin is the money. I don't care about the fiat denomination of it. Bitcoin is the money. Have you not been listening to me the last 4 years? Like, that's what I've been trying to bang into your thick skull, is that change your money. And, you want more of that money. That's essentially what you want. So you're 100% right. As your fiat denomination starts to increase, you're getting this anxiety, because ultimately, if you are on a Bitcoin standard, you are earning Bitcoin. It does ultimately mean less Bitcoin if you're still tethering back to the fiat world, right?
Absolutely. It's also interesting how people see it with the speculated asset, because most people, most people on the planet see Bitcoin either as something speculative, a small asset, or as a scam still. Like, there's a lot of, we are way earlier than we think we are. When do you think this changes, or what needs to happen that people kind of get Bitcoin, what it actually is and what it represents, kind of have the understanding of an average Bitcoiner right now? How long will this take to get this understanding in the masses in there?
I think what it takes is sustained inflation. I think that's the easy one, and it's funny, even the most normie of normies that you speak to, you go back 5 years, no one understood what fiat currency is, but it's crazy to me how commonplace it's becoming. I wouldn't say it's still widespread by any stretch, but it's starting to become a little bit more of the normal vocabulary. And I think people are wising up to the fact that there is a money printer, and this sustained lot of inflation that everyone's been feeling. Like the reports are inflation's coming down, and they paint that as a good picture, but it's still an increase in the purchase or in the cost of goods and services, just at a reduced rate. And I think people are really starting to question it, at least in my sort of circles, in and around the industry that I work in. I mean, we're probably pretty lucky in the sense that we're quite affluent. The sort of industry I work in is quite high wages, so maybe I'm in a bit of an echo chamber in terms of people who have probably a bit more to spend in and look at investing, and probably a bit more clued into finance and investing. So I'm very aware of that fact, but I am encouraged by the fact that even beyond that and other conversations outside of that sort of immediate work circle, I think that the language is starting to shift. I do actually think that it's becoming a little bit more commonplace. Like people just know, fundamentally they know, when they go into the grocery store and they're going to the fuel bowser, they know that they're not getting as much for their dollar as they once did.
Yeah, it's the inflation is the thing. It's also interesting because once there's an exit valve in a system, we have the same thing with Twitter, Facebook, and Nostra. I feel like since Nostra is around and Twitter and Facebook are aware of those things, and even Facebook is aware of what Twitter is doing, and Twitter is aware of what Nostra is doing, you have an exit valve. If they are censoring too much, you have a place where they can all of a sudden go. If there's only Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg would have never done anything in that realm. But because there's Twitter, where there's more freedom of speech, people can go there. And the same from Twitter, there's still censorship and there's still controls in there. If you want to go further, you can go to Nostra. And I feel like the same is true for fiat currency. If you are having the Turkish lira, you're like, oh, let's go to the US dollar because that's so much better. If you're in the US dollar and it goes worse and worse and worse, you can just go into Bitcoin. And that kind of control, that kind of exit valve of people can flee there, makes actually the other thing, I think, better. Because now the Federal Reserve, now the other ones, they cannot do crazy money printing because there is now a scoreboard of how bad they are actually doing. If the Federal Reserve does the same thing now than it did in 2020 in COVID, this will be 5x or 10x worse than in 2020. Bitcoin will be at like 1.4 million in like no time if they actually print again like 50% of the money supply. So with that in mind, you're totally right, and I see that the same exact way of like inflation is the one thing that everyone notices. You cannot hide higher prices. Like you can if the inflation is like 2-3%, you can spin it around and say like, oh yeah, we need inflation to like stuff like that. But if it's like 10-20% and consistently and going up, like people are not dumb. They know what's going on. You can only spin so much. So I really like that thing of like there's an exit valve all of the sudden there, and it makes inflation more seeable and more feelable for the people. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good analogy around the social media aspect and comparing that to the different currencies. I think it's a really good analogy. And I think the other entry mechanism for people, particularly in Australia, is real estate. Like particularly for young people who probably get the digital currency thesis quicker than the boomers necessarily. But in Australia, you just cannot buy property if you're in your 20s. You will not be able to save for a deposit, particularly if you're in one of these capital cities like Sydney, where little units in the Sydney CBD are selling for millions of dollars. And then you go out to the outer suburbs and little butterbox 2-bedroom houses are selling for millions of dollars. You cannot save on a normal retail or hospitality wage. You cannot save a deposit to get into that market, let alone service your debt without, having 14 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. So I think that's the other entry mechanism by which, we can start to draw that contrast between your type of money. So for anybody denominating real estate in fiat currency, it's forever growing. for anyone who just changes their frame and thinks about money in a different way and just chooses a different form of money, one that's not forever printed out of thin air, one that's not continuously losing its purchasing power, one that is a finite supply, one that will increase in purchasing power. You denominate real estate in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only currency globally where real estate's going down.
And I have to show you something. If I can do that, let me see. There, and that's what I also love. That website, you're probably aware of the website, like Priced in Bitcoin. I don't know if you know it, but I've showed it sometimes. And seeing that of like, yeah, young generation cannot afford a housing because it gets more expensive. But if we actually like adopt the Bitcoin standard, housing will be affordable for you again. Like if you have a Bitcoin standard for like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, all of a sudden you can maybe buy with a small part of your stack a house where your family lives in it. And I noticed that a lot of Bitcoiners actually want to own a house. They want to own the thing that their family is in. It's really important for them, and that story is really powerful. And seeing that growth of like real estate is going up quite fast actually. Like for an asset that is getting worse over time. Like everyone that owns a house knows a house after 10 years is so much worse in the condition than in the starting. You have to do so many repairs. Like it's a constant work you have to do with a house. I grew up in a house since like I was 2 years old, and I just saw my parents all the time working on the house. Either there's a new project that you want to change something, or there's something old broken. All the time things are happening in a house. And then having an asset that you don't have to do anything except keep it safe, which, yeah, you figure one time out and you maybe want to tweak it around like every year and make sure everything is perfect. And that's so superior. And then you can maybe afford a house with that. Like that's an amazing thing, especially for the young generation. I'm like 26 now, and owning a home without Bitcoin wouldn't even be in my vocabulary. And thanks to Bitcoin, I'm like, okay, I can see how I might be able to afford a home maybe when I'm 30 or 35. That's kind of the hope that Bitcoin gives you. I love that. Do you also own real estate, or do you see it with real estate?
Yeah, I've just got, I don't own investment properties anymore. Well, I can't actually say that because we just moved out of our house and we're renting it out. So we're just about to hit the road in the caravan with the kids. We pulled them out of school for the year and we're going to tour Australia for 12 months in the caravan. So I do have a home. My wife likes the security of having a home. And I guess it comes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And a lot of your listeners are probably familiar with that. But food and shelter are one of the base layers of human need, human endeavor, and it's when you secure those, you can start to, look towards self-actualization. You're climbing that ladder. My wife loves the family home. She loves having the security of having a roof overhead and a place to call home. But I see very much like yourself and like you've just highlighted, houses are massive liabilities, and in Australia, we don't have a very big or evolved stock market, and it's not cultural like sometimes I observe in the US, perhaps in and around investing in the stock market. So a lot of Aussie battlers, Aussie wage earners, to get ahead, they know subconsciously that the money's broke and they know they can't save in dollars, so they're always looking towards property. You talk to any Aussie who's looking to get ahead, their number one goal is to get an investment property. And they are massive liabilities. So the house we were just in, we built that ourselves in 2010. What are we, 14, 15 years on now? And it's just starting to fall apart. I had to spend so much money just getting it rent ready for tenants to move into it while we're taking this 12-month hiatus because we wanted to rent it out and obviously get that income, turn that into Bitcoin while we're on the road, and Bob's your uncle. But yeah, it was everywhere I turned just needed more maintenance.
What did motivate you to take that trip of like 12 months tour around Australia and leave the home behind for like a year?
Yeah, it was a multiple of things, but obviously hanging around Bitcoiners, it's pretty infectious. Read Daniel Prince's book, Choose Life. That's an amazing book if anyone hasn't read it. And he's a prolific Bitcoiner who's been doing that, living his best life with his family spending a lot of time together as a family unit. My boys are getting at that cool age where they'll remember it, so they're 8 and 11. And I missed a lot of the early years. I was hustling, working the fiat slave mine, spent a lot of time away from home trying to provide for the family. And we just decided that we needed a bit of a break with the family. And it's ultimately been through Bitcoin. Bitcoin has enabled me and given me a lot more optionality to choose how I direct my time. And that's simply through understanding and hodling. And it's allowed us to sit back and then reassess what's important to us. And at the moment, it's not earning fiat money anymore. It's now, how do we maximize the time with the children while they're young, while they still want to know us before they turn into teenagers and don't want to know their dad anymore. And so we decided to pull them out of school and homeschool them. We're going to travel school on the road, and we've got a beautiful country. We're pretty lucky that we live in Australia. It's a lot parts of it. It's a big country where I haven't seen most of it. I've seen Queensland a lot. That's where the state that I live in, but it's a out of the 7 states, I haven't traveled very far out of them. So it was just a great opportunity to spend a bit more time with family. And it's really, for 2025 for us, it's about family connection. That's really what we wanted to focus on, is just getting back to some grassroots and spend as much time with the kids and while these formative years.
That's amazing, because it kind of shows this Bitcoin life where you don't stack Bitcoin to have more Bitcoin, you stack Bitcoin to get more life. Like, that's the ultimate goal. And I love that you're on that journey. And that's amazing. I had it with Daniel Prince just like 5-6 days ago, a podcast episode or something like that. And he actually talked about Choose It Live in the end of the podcast. And he mentioned that someone, I don't know if it was you, but someone came up to him and said like, oh, like I hate your book because now I have to do that finally. Now there's no more excuses that I don't travel the world or something like that. Was that by any chance you?
It could possibly have been me. I know Princey quite well, so it could have been me saying tongue in cheek, because I read that book. Would have been a good 3 years ago, and it was once I read it was just an itch that needed to be scratched, and it just kept going. And I mean, this has probably been about a year in planning and making. We sort of made the decision that we were going to do it, and took a year to sort of get our ducks aligned in a row and make sure everything was sort of organised. And we're currently living on the front lawn in the caravan at my mother-in-law's place on her front lawn, and we'll be leaving in 2 weeks' time, 1st of Feb. So,
did you also went all in Bitcoin, or did you like slowly get in there in 2020 and the following years? How did you do that?
What's that? Sorry, when I discovered Bitcoin, did I go all in?
Yes, but I'm really curious on how quick people getting orange pill, because right now I see like people getting really quickly orange pill, like people that come in 2024, they are like 5-6 months in, and they're already like further down the rabbit hole than I was after like 2 years. So it's like, it seems to be a very fast process. And so like, I'm curious how long it took you to like adopt this Bitcoin standard mindset and I don't know, go all in, depending on what does go all in even mean.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I agree with you. I think that's accelerating, and I think that's only due to the great work Bitcoiners have put in. So the class of 2014 helped shape the class of 2017. The class of 2017 helped shape the class of 2020. And it's just, we're getting more materials. The messaging is getting more succinct, and there's just a lot more avenues for you to get exposure to that messaging and to get that conviction, like I spoke about a little bit earlier. And so for me personally, it was pretty quick. I'd say pretty well all in within a year. So 2019, discovering why the message, 2020 till I sort of really heard the message, bought my first Bitcoin not until 2020, then tried to break it, right? So as I was learning, as I was buying, absorbed a lot of information. I love reading, and worked out a few hacks to sort of speed read and get absorb information really quickly over time, which I'm happy to talk about actually if that's of interest. But I'd say by the end of that 2020, I'd started my own self-managed super fund, which is our retirement accounts in Australia. Got exposure to Bitcoin in there as well. And from 2020, end of 2020 was really, it didn't take very long at all. And large exposure. And I don't manage risk in the way that I was 100% ever. And I'm still not 100%, but it is now very, very high percentage of that. And the fiat exposure is getting smaller and smaller by the day. And that's just purely, most of that's driven by the virtue of just the tenure of having exposure to it over time. Like obviously it's just growing and growing and growing, and the fiat exposure hasn't been added to, and it's just growing at a smaller rate, and it just gets absorbed by the bigger piece. And when I guess the important part, and I often get asked this by friends and family who obviously, you talk to about not specific figures, but they can see that Bitcoin's now playing a larger part in your life, and it's opened up a lot more avenues and provided for your family and created abundance where on steroids, basically, where that wouldn't have been able to happen before. And quite often I get asked, are you going to take some off the table? And it's kind of that argument before around, have you made any money? Well, it is the money. So I just want more of the money, right? Bitcoin is the money. So I want more of the Bitcoin. But in all seriousness, when you look and you read any major investment book or any major investment advice peripherals rather, that have come through in the last couple of decades, and most of them say diversification. If you're sitting on big gains, roll some out, take some off the table, and diversify your assets into other things when you've made significant wealth and gains. And when I do that with Bitcoin, and I think about doing that with Bitcoin, I look around the investment landscape, there is seriously nothing else I want to buy. When you actually understand how to value stocks, for example, you understand how to do a discount cash flow on a stock and do a valuation on what a stock is actually worth, you realize that everything, real estate, stocks, equities, private equity, all trading upon at multiples upon what would otherwise be considered fair value. So when I look around the investment landscape, and if I was going to sell Bitcoin, all I would want to do is buy more Bitcoin. Now, it's kind of testament to when I get more fiat right now, at any stage, I look around, I go, righto, what am I going to do with this fiat? Obviously, satisfy your immediate needs, your food, your shelter, or your bills, all that sort of stuff, and the leftover, where do I want to park this? Where is it going to perform best? Where's it going to protect my purchasing power or improve my asset portfolio? And it's Bitcoin every single time. So, if I'm going to diversify at this stage of the game, all I'm going to want to do is get exposure to more Bitcoin.
Are you playing any fiat games in terms of getting a loan against your house or something like that?
No, it's definitely something I'm keeping abreast of. That may be something. I should say I did actually tap into some equity on my mortgage, and it comes down to opportunity cost, right? So I do have a mortgage, Again, quite often friends and family say, well, why wouldn't you use some of your Bitcoin to pay off your mortgage and live mortgage free? And it comes down to opportunity cost. So I can get that mortgage. I fix that mortgage rate at something ridiculous like 2.6% for the next 6 years. So while my ability to shift the needle with my own appreciating my returns, that if I put that capital to work, I am damn sure that I can perform better than the 2.6%. And it all comes down to that what they call that opportunity cost. So I could be servicing that debt down and saving myself 2.6%, or I could put that capital to work in a performing asset like Bitcoin that's experiencing a compound annual growth rate of 40% year on year, give or take. So it'd be madness of me knowing the Bitcoin thesis not to. And I did tap into some equity. And again, I don't overexpose myself into leverage, but we had quite a significant amount of equity sitting in the home loan. Knowing we were going to hit the road this year, I know I'm a big advocate for dollar cost averaging. So for any wage earner who wants to get exposure to Bitcoin, the best honest way that you could do that is to dollar cost average. Put a little bit of your wage aside each day or each week, whatever that means for you. Something that you're not going to need in the next 4 years. It's not stuff that you're going to want to pay the bills with next week. put it aside, stack Bitcoin, come back for it at a later date. And knowing that I was going to hit the road and probably and not earn as much Bitcoin anymore, I was sort of looking around my options and said, well, what could I do for me to counteract it? If I know I'm not going to dollar cost average anymore, how can I bring some of that dollar cost average forward if I'm going to be missing it out for the next year? And I'm looking at this equity in this home that's, doing nothing, and the interest rates are still quite low in comparison to what I think Bitcoin can do. So we tapped into a little bit of that and turned it into Bitcoin. So playing the fiat game, playing the speculative fiat game around, do I think whatever my cost to carry and service the loan against my mortgage, without overexposing yourself in a way that's going to get you in trouble if Bitcoin were to dip, in my humble opinion, I'd be mad not to.
Yeah, I think the question that everyone has to ask themselves, if you do that, playing that fiat game, would you still be okay if a good amount of your income might break away, and over the next 2 years or 3 years, we are having like an 80% drawdown in Bitcoin? Would you still be fine with that? Obviously, the income is a hard part of that, and it also depends on like what kind of thing you have. Like, do you need to service the debt with like a huge amount every month, and do you have big troubles when all of a sudden your income breaks away for like a few months? Can happen to everyone. So like those questions everyone has to ask themselves. I tried it and still have something running, but I'm currently working to reverse all of that, and it's so small. I could with my Bitcoin stack, I could easily pay it off really easily. It wouldn't make a huge dam on the Bitcoin stack. That's why I just keep it. And I was like, oh, like, it's easy. But I'm just not the person for that. Like I would just like to have my Bitcoin stack and pay from that. I also, this is an interesting topic, and it's very controversial. I actually would like to pay everything with my Bitcoin directly, because then I don't have to have fiat. Everyone says like, oh, use fiat to pay and hodl your Bitcoin. But if I pay with my fiat, I have to hold fiat also, or I have credit, and I'm not a big credit guy, so I want to avoid that. I have credit right now, but I want to put that away over the next years. So that's an interesting topic where I'm like, okay, I actually want to be as much on a Bitcoin standard as possible, and spend my Bitcoin. Like, that's money. Like, I want to use that money. I know using fiat would be better, but I don't even want to touch fiat. I don't want to do anything with fiat, and I earn Bitcoin. So in the long run, anyways, I have to at some point sell Bitcoin, because I don't have my fiat income stream gets smaller and my Bitcoin income stream gets bigger. So at some point I run in that thing anyways. But it's really interesting also what you said about wage earners, that they that once they just get to a Bitcoin standard, they don't have to be day traders anymore and look at Q2, Q10, and those earning reports of stocks and those earnings calls and stuff like that. That's a huge insight.
Yeah, and I think this cycle too, I think this is kind of related to the topic we've been talking about with the fiat games and tapping into the appreciation in your purchasing power by holding Bitcoin. This cycle is where we really see institutional grade offerings for borrowing against your Bitcoin. So we have it in just about every other asset. And there are some, like Ledin and HODL are some services that you can do this. And essentially what I'm talking about is borrowing against your Bitcoin. So, we've got quite well-established products for real estate, got quite well-established products for equities to borrow against. If you have a big bag of stocks, Amazon stock, you can borrow against that and use that to fund your lifestyle. And I think, and there's always dangers with this, and there's probably something to really highlight from the get-go, is be very careful when it comes to these offerings, because they will pop up. We had a few blow up in the last cycle. I'm not advocating at all for staking your Bitcoin to earn a yield. That's not what I'm talking about. But there will be institutional grade offerings to be able to, say, enter into a 2 or 3 multi-sig with a platform, a lender and a borrower, where you stake an over-collateralized loan. You stake, say, $1 million worth of Bitcoin to borrow $500,000 to fund your lifestyle. They will. I already know of a few, pretty prominent Bitcoiners in the space that shall remain nameless at this stage, but working on those types of offerings. And that is a way that Bitcoiners can start to tap into and use the Bitcoin appreciation, the purchasing power of the appreciation of their Bitcoin to start funding their lifestyles, to start, providing for their families, or choosing to perhaps go into real estate without selling your Bitcoin. And that's only going to become more and more prolific, I think, over this next couple of cycles, if not this one, at least the next two. And we will see institutional grade in terms of the big banks. They will want to hodl your Bitcoin, and they will probably give you a fairly decent interest rate for the service of it. I'm not advocating that you necessarily need to do that, but those services will pop up, and then you make a judgment call for your own self around, if I take a small portion of my stack, that I can start tapping into some of the equity, some of the purchasing power of that. Is that a bad thing? And no, I don't think it is. And it also potentially, depending on your jurisdiction, wherever you live, can actually give you tax advantage ways of doing it. In most jurisdictions, that's not a capital gain event. To borrow against your Bitcoin to fund your lifestyle, you don't have to realize you're not disposing of the Bitcoin. You're simply parking it and tapping into it. Very much like with property, right? Now, property moguls have been doing this for years. They will buy a portfolio of properties, and then they start 1 year. They'll tap into the equity of one property, and they'll service the loans for the others, as well as fund their lifestyle. Then the second year, they'll go to the second property, and they'll borrow against the equity in that the appreciation of the capital that property is worth. They'll tap into that, and they'll again borrow against that to fund the loan repayments of all of the others, as well as fund their lifestyles. And that's how you can tap into the appreciation of an asset. And it's only a matter of time before that is available in abundance with Bitcoin, because it's one of the most pristine assets we've ever had.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. And make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty.
That's a good thing. I think that's it's an amazing insight to have. It's also, you said before, with like this 2.1, 2.3 or 6% what you're paying on the mortgage. It's like, yeah, like Bitcoin is, it will be really hard to not see an on average and 30%
almost risk-free return, or there's nothing risk-free, there are risks associated with that, but it's like the closest thing that we have to a 30% risk-free return over the next 5-10 years, and probably way higher. I don't believe diminishing returns at all. I think they are kind of BS, and I think we will have a huge adoption wave and a huge cycle breaking of that kind of a thing. But it's the thing you save your money in. It's the best money ever, and I love your story with that. Yeah, really cool.
Well, and you've hit a really good point too. Just to circle all this back to other equity, all other assets, right? And when you look around, I said before, like everything's so grossly overvalued because everything's attracted a monetary premium. And when you fix the money, the monetary premium no longer needs to exist in these other assets. So that's one aspect. But then also, as people start to realize what Bitcoin is and Bitcoin's performance over the last decade, and like you say, I'm a big believer of that too. Diminishing returns? No, I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to just continue to see an acceleration of adoption as people start to look around, look at Bitcoin, look at what it starts doing to their friends and family, and an ever growing community of people who are starting to feather their nests and really start to tap into the optionality that Bitcoin's provided. It's only going to put fuel on that fire of adoption. And then the hurdle rate. People are then going to start looking around at all these other assets that they own, and they say, well, if you're not performing, if Mr. Equity, Mr. Amazon stock, Mr. Apple stock, if you're not giving me a 30% return, why the hell do I own you? So we're going to actually see a major correction, and all that monetary premium gets sucked out of these other assets, and they will actually return back to fair value. And I think Preston Pish speaks about this quite often. He's obviously a great mind in the space. He somebody who was definitely formative in my journey in understanding Bitcoin. And he speaks about this all the time in and around. There will be a time when I'll probably look at offloading some Bitcoin when that evens out in terms of getting when other assets start to get back to their fair value, and it starts to become attractive again to somebody to say, like we spoke about before. Some people at some stage in their life may like to have a roof over their head. And then it comes down to that opportunity cost in around, well, what are you actually selling me? Bricks and mortar. What is that worth? And what is that worth in Bitcoin terms? And at some point in time, that will shift. And now I value the house more than I value that amount of Bitcoin. So, of course, they're going to use any means necessary to go and acquire that, whether that's selling their Bitcoin or tapping into some of these products that we've been speaking about to try and tap into that in tax efficient ways.
That's a super interesting one. It's kind of increasing the hurdle rate for investing. If we have a fiat standard of a US dollar, your hurdle rate is -5, -10, -20%. It's like you really want to get rid of it. But if you have then Bitcoin, currently the hurdle rate is +30, +40, +50% a year, whatever you take. And yes, we have now a huge adoption. So Bitcoin will also not increase in purchasing power that quickly in the future. It will probably slow down at some point if in 20, 30, 40 years, but you will still have a positive purchasing power. And just that increase of you don't have 10, 20% minus hurdle rate, you have 3, 5, maybe 10% plus of a hurdle rate each year. That completely changes how you look at investing, because all of a sudden just keeping your money will increase your purchasing power, which means you need less money every year, which means if you have a big enough stack, you live forever with that stack. You don't have to risk anything. You don't have to, is it now Tesla the future, or is some Chinese manufacturer the future? Where are we going with space travel? What is the best AI play? This is fun topics if you're interested in it. And I love those topics, and I will get back to that and probably even talk on my channel in some point in 5-10 years around it, because it's really fun. But if you're just, I don't know, a doctor and want to save lives on a day, you don't want to come home and see if now Microsoft, because of OpenAI, has a better chance at being the biggest stock in the future versus some other smaller AI company and dig really deep. Like that's not your job. Like your job is being a great doctor, and that's probably you have chosen that route. So you probably are passionate about being that and saving people's life and helping people. So you should not do that investment. You should spend time with your family.
You're 100% right. Most people have two jobs, right? One is earning the money, and then two is learning not to lose it. Like me, I was an electrician, with an engineering degree, and I ended up spending all my nights reading finance books. Spent 2 years reading every book I could get my hands on just to learn how to invest before I actually invested. Ultimately, what led me to Bitcoin. But I shouldn't have to. I'm an electrician. I should just be able to go to my job, do my job well, provide more value so that I can retain value out of the money that I pay. Put that money aside, and it should be able to come back at a rainy day. We need to make money like Grandma used to say it worked. Put it under the bed, come back and buy yourself something pretty after you've saved it for a while. That's what money should be, not this forever eroding, extractive product that is slowly just robbing you of your time and energy. Like you're spending so much time away from your friends and family now. Both mum and dad are at work. Most people have to work overtime. I certainly did. Spent years and years working as much overtime as I could just to simply try to get ahead, put some money aside, and then quickly realizing that if I didn't actually put that money to work, it wasn't going to do anything for me. So I was forced into having to read all these finance books. It wasn't fun. I didn't actually want to do it. I just had to do it. I just realized I was lucky in a sense that I sort of woke up to the fact that if I didn't do it, I was going to be screwed. So, and now it's funny. Like, I was only just talking to another Bitcoiner friend of mine too, and we've been in the space a little while now, and we're starting to listen to less Bitcoin podcasts. It's like, well, we've learnt all there is to learn about Bitcoin itself. I still find the conversations interesting, and don't get me wrong, I certainly haven't stopped it, but I'm not filling my day with Bitcoin podcasts, because that's where I got to at one point, was just trying to get as much information just to try and cement that conviction again. And now I'm sitting back and going, I can listen to them at leisure now. I don't have to be doing the deep download, because I understand it. It's not going anywhere, and I don't even care about the short-term price. The fundamentals are always sound, so I don't need to spend any more time learning any more about it.
And that's an amazing insight, because I consumed on a daily basis when I came into Bitcoin like 2-3 podcasts. Like I was crazy. Like
Two times speed.
Like 2 times speed. Like going, I always have like 1.75. 2 was too much for me. It's like I cannot do it. I know most people do it, and some people even want more than 2x. It's my brain cannot comprehend. But yeah, like 1.75 or 1.5 depends on the host. Some people are really fast talkers also. Some are really slow. There's like even 2 possible. But yeah, like consuming that is amazing, and that learning curve. Now my situation is a completely different one, because I have a Bitcoin podcast production every day anyway. So like I listen to a Bitcoin podcast just by that every day. It's my own one. So I rarely listen to Bitcoin podcasts now. I like once a week maybe, that I'm like, oh, like there was a lot of buzz on that one, or there's an interesting clip that I saw, or like this looks really interesting. I here and there look into a Bitcoin podcast, really rarely. But my situation is kind of unique, because I do so many producing things. In general, I don't consume a lot. Like I really step down on and don't consume a lot of content. Because I'm so busy producing social media content, so I kind of switch my role. But even if I wouldn't do that, I probably would have scaled back my producing. And one thing that I hear, and which is really interesting, is people that work in the fiat space, they come to my podcast and they say like, I already know about Bitcoin, but I still love getting my daily Bitcoin fix after having like 8-hour shifts at a fiat world. It's like finally there's some Bitcoin escape where I can get to, like, I hear that argument a lot, and I can get it, especially if you're if you live in an environment where there's not a lot of Bitcoiners or maybe no other Bitcoiner around you. It's kind of nice to have that escape patch. I don't know if you have a lot of Bitcoiners in your personal environment and how your family also looks in it. So it's an interesting topic, but it's definitely a use case for that I saw, which surprised me, but it shouldn't have surprised me.
I think the commute's always a good one, because you generally will commute on your own. Like, I think in most situations, I don't know if that's just a generalization or not, but I think that's always. I still, this afternoon rode my bike home from work, get some exercise in. Bitcoin podcast. If I'm going to listen to anything, it's going to be a Bitcoin podcast. But I just tend to find the need to be that satiating, the need to satiate the thirst is no longer there to be like constantly putting it in my ears. And I think the other thing I was sort of reflecting on over Christmas, which I thought was nice, was obviously I love reading and always loved reading a lot, and I love reading nonfiction. I love learning. I actually just sat down for the first time in a long time and just read a fiction book for a while, and I actually just really enjoyed just reading again. For the love of reading, instead of the sort of trying to do the massive matrix download, where he's sitting in the chair and they feed all this information to him. He wakes up and goes, "I know kung fu." Like, that's how I sort of treated learning these last couple of years, just trying to absorb as many books as I could in and around this topic, around macroeconomics, inflation, finance in general, Bitcoin obviously. And now I just been able to take my foot off that accelerator a little bit and just enjoy it, and actually get back to the original love of reading, which is I've always had. I've been lucky to have that since I was a kid, and just sat down over Christmas, read a really big book, and just went, wow, that was really nice.
It is an interesting, because right now I'm in such a growth mode, and I mean, this has less to do now with Bitcoin, but I'm just like, every time either I'm trying to produce something or learn something, and my girlfriend kind of has to get me out of that mood, and every once in a while also like just enjoying life. My only thing that I have regular is like swimming, so I go 4 times a week swimming, 3 times alone and 1 time with my girlfriend, and it's amazing. It's like just like, I'm just in the water, I'm swimming 1, 2, 3 kilometers per session, and I love it. I don't even take my phone with me. Like, I go out of the house to the pool and without phone. It's a frightening feeling, but once you get used to it, it's really cool.
And having that. It's funny you say that, because my wife loves swimming and I don't mind swimming. But when I was going through that really hectic phase around trying to absorb, I'd actually avoid swimming because I couldn't listen to a podcast while I swam. I used to like exercising, so I'd go to the gym and I'd get on bikes and I'd ride bikes and all that sort of thing, because I knew I could always have headphones in my ears. But I actually would avoid swimming because I didn't find out a good way to listen to podcasts while I did it. I think there's like some Bluetooth ones you can get these days with a headband, which is pretty cool. But it's funny you say that. And I think like now I'd probably enjoy swimming again, because it's just a really good excuse to disconnect, right? And you're in your own thoughts. And I think we don't spend enough time just in our own thoughts, reflecting on your day, reflecting on life in general. And I think swimming is a really good way to just force that disconnect.
Absolutely. I just wanted to find that, but I was there's apparently none of the pictures online, unfortunately. I find one. No, I don't. But because I was on Austrian national level, actually, I swam really. For Austrian standards, really successfully,
wow.
And I loved it. And now I'm trying to learn my girlfriend swimming, but unfortunately, you don't find pictures. At least I don't find pictures, because all the Bitcoin pictures come before that. If you Google me, maybe I'll maybe I'll find one and show it somehow in the podcast one day. But yeah, like swimming is a big passion of mine that I kind of lost the last few years, and now it comes back, and I really do enjoy it. It's just like that moment when I travel. Like I don't even want to have headphones. I just want to zone out, and under the water you hear a little less, and it's an amazing feeling. So I get I get why your wife likes it. It's an amazing feeling once you really get into it. I also like running a lot for the same reason. I'm not that good in running, that's why I prefer swimming. But running is the same thing for me, like the sports, and it's like just like going on for like an hour and running, not fast, just like on a average base, and just like running somewhere. It has something amazing that keeps you going, and it's definitely a Bitcoin thing. I feel like that sports thing.
Yeah, magic.
Really cool. One thing that I wanted to actually ask you, like right in the beginning of the podcast, is do you see we have those evolutions in innovation? We got electricity, then we got the internet, now we got Bitcoin with the money part. Do you see kind of Bitcoin now as the electricity that we from our generation? Is it that fundamental to our life, or is maybe electricity even further? Was it even more fundamental to our life? Like what is kind of the scale of how big of a evolution or revolution Bitcoin is? And maybe you as an electrician, maybe it's interesting to compare it to electricity, which was a very interesting technology that came us and also had some further along the way in the beginning, especially, as we know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. I honestly do see it as a step change in human innovation. We haven't had a money like it. And when you study money, when you study monetary history, you understand all the properties of money, and you realize that Bitcoin's the first one that solved all of those issues really well. So, gold was the closest. Gold was available enough to be plentiful enough to be useful. It was, durable enough not to erode, corrode, react with other metals. It was portable enough that it could retain value. It was divisible enough at the time. But when you fast forward, where did gold fail? Gold fail in its transportability. As the globe opened up and as global trade opened up, and the internet started to really cement itself into global economics, it's pretty easy to see how gold failed. And I think Lynn Alden's book talks about that, Broken Money. Really good book, really big book, but just does a massive deep dive into how money as we know it, like fiat currency as we know it, how it failed, why it is broken. And she always posits one of those reasons is because it didn't keep up with technology. We kind of were forced into a fiat currency system on digital rails through that SWIFT network because we had to catch up. The globe was opening up, trade was opening up, and this yellow rock couldn't keep up with that trade without trusted intermediaries. And I think that, there's a really good book called The Tower of Babel that speaks about central banking and so forth, and the Bank of International Settlements. And there's an example in that book, if I'm recalling it correctly, that illustrates the problems with a trusted intermediary, in particular with gold storage. So it goes back to World War II. Germany invades Czechoslovakia. Everybody's got their gold stores at the Bank of International Settlements. And, there's a pile of gold here for Germany. There's a pile of gold here for Czechoslovakia. And Germany invades Czechoslovakia, gets in contact with the Bank of International Settlements and said, hey, that big pile of gold with Czechoslovakia's name on it, that's now ours. And Bank of International Settlements just turns around and says, okay. And right there is enough evidence to suggest why a trusted intermediary can't be trusted. Like there's no such thing as a trusted intermediary. And that's where Bitcoin really solved this notion of how do you move value at scale through space and time at the click of a button, without trusted intermediaries, with a bearer instrument. And that's really the step change function in why I say it was a game changer in terms of technology. And it is this generation's version of discovering electricity. It's because we finally fixed the money. It's finite, it's durable, it's portable. all of those things Bitcoin solves to a T. And that's really when, if I circle back to right to the beginning of this conversation, is how you fall down that rabbit hole so fast. It was that realization of, I got the gold thesis, I got why we needed money that worked. But then when you start tearing the layers off and start critically questioning why gold failed, that's why. And you highlighted it earlier. Gold, the other big drawback to gold was its self-cannibalizing cannibalizing nature. As gold price increases, it only incentivizes production. It only incentivizes these gold miners to ramp up production at some cost. It is now viable to go and mine that really costly seam in the jungles of Peru. It is now at some gold price profitable to go and extract the finite particles of gold that exist in seawater. It is now, economically viable to go and launch that rocket into space and go and mine that asteroid at some point in gold. And that was probably the big penny drop moment for me, was coming across the difficulty adjustment and how Bitcoin solved that exact thing. Doesn't matter how high the Bitcoin price goes. Of course, the higher Bitcoin price goes, more incentive is out there for these miners to go and ramp up production, improve their facilities, improve efficiencies, buy more machines, and try and get the bigger piece of that pie. But through the difficulty adjustment, doesn't matter how much more economic power you throw at that, it's not going to inflate the supply any more than the self-adjusting issuance rate of one block every 10 minutes with the halving cycle into perpetuity, into the projected year 2140 till we mine the last Bitcoin. It will only be 21 million Bitcoin, and we know with absolute certainty the issuance rate for the next 120 odd years.
That's amazing that we have that certainty. That's like, you don't have that certainty in anything else. How do you see Bitcoin now interjecting with energy and electricity with Bitcoin mining? How do you see that topic, especially as an electrician also?
Yeah, that's probably a really, really good question, big question. But honestly, I think it will be the denomination for energy costs. It will all be costed in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin and energy grids just are marriage made in heaven. There's a lot of excess in grids. So I, obviously, being an electrical engineer, I work on the grid. I see day to day the inefficiencies of grid operation. And probably one of the easiest ways to explain to people is that grids are built for what we call maximum demand in the industry. So your whole electricity grid, from the poles, the wires, the infrastructure, the generators, everything is planned for the worst of days. So the worst of days in Australia, hot, sticky summer periods, there's, 5% of the time we spend in this really high maximum demand zone of operation where you have to have generators available. And most people don't realize, or most people are starting to realize, but just for those at home who don't, when you turn that light switch on at home, there has to be a generator running with available capacity to supply that power to you in real time. So we're constantly forecasting what we call this demand, what we call this maximum demand. And we're trying to make sure that at any one time, when everyone wants to turn their lights, air conditioners, ovens on at the same time, we've got these generators available with enough capacity. Now, where that presents is the opportunity for Bitcoin miners, because what we really need to run a grid efficiently is controllable load. Fast, flexible, controllable load at scale. And that's essentially what Bitcoin mining is. And it's unique in its respect that we can turn it off at the click of a dime. And what that really presents is an opportunity for us to soak up the delta between your normal demand level and your maximum demand level. And we can soak up and monetize the capacity in between. So what that means is if you build your grid out for 100% capacity, okay, but you spend most of your time at 20%, there's that delta in between of obviously not making any money. You're not making any revenue. So if you can introduce a flexible load source into that grid, you can start to monetize the wasted capacity. You can start to tap into that underutilized capacity, introduce another revenue source, and it ultimately makes everyone's bills cheaper, because we're no longer having to subsidize running at 20% for 80% of the time, and accounting for this only very brief period of maximum demand. By introducing that load center, you're introducing more revenue, and that can be shared and distributed against everybody who taps into that. Every consumer in that grid is ultimately subsidizing the cost of that grid and not being able to tap into all of its revenue at any one time. I'll probably just pause there because there's probably a lot of terms that I'm throwing around that you might want to ask some questions about. But essentially it's just a game changer in being able to monetize unused capacity.
What I'm also interested in is like, how will Bitcoin mining be incorporated in the future in all our electricity grids? We already have things like 21 Energy and other providers that basically provide space heaters with Bitcoin mining. But then maybe we even have in the future where there's like a village and there's like a section or region that uses on a very small scale level for like maybe 5, 10, 50 houses, a Bitcoin miner to balance the load. Or maybe that's even possible on a house-to-house basis where like every house has, or every bigger house who facilitates a few people has some sort of Bitcoin miner with, I don't know, maybe like solar energy and stuff like that on the roof to balance the load and monetize on otherwise wasted energy. Because from what I understand is it's best to use the energy right away. Like that's the most efficient way. Whenever you transfer it and try to keep it for a longer time or longer distances, you lose a lot in the process. So it just makes sense for me in my head, even though I have no clue and no experience in that field, but it just makes sense in my head of like using Bitcoin mining to monetize on otherwise wasted energy and monetize on that and balance the load even on a very small local level.
Yeah, what it really represents is an opportunity for us to finally be able to generate at smaller scale. So traditionally, why we end up with these massive networks, massive transmission networks, and I'll just illustrate how big our networks can be. So in Australia, we're a massive country. We can fit a good portion of Europe just within Australia, and we have an interconnected grid all the way from the top of Queensland right down through to Tasmania, and it punches into South Australia. I don't know the exact kilometres over, but it's thousands of kilometres of interconnected transmission network. And why we've done that in the past is because we haven't had load centres coupled with the generators so that you can tap into the economics. You can tap into the capacity there and monetize it in real time. So we've had to build out this network so that we can share it across vast distances, but you have a lot of losses in that. And what I think Bitcoin mining represents is an opportunity where you'll have smaller scale community and smaller scale grids starting to, because you can, anytime you put a generator in, now we can park a load center and flexible load center right next door, and you can soak up all of that demand, all of that generational capacity rather, in real time and monetize that. So all of these projects become more economical, and you don't need the grid. You don't need this massive transmission network, because if I go and put a 60 gigawatt wind farm right at the top of Texas, like they did, there's no customers there to sell it to. So I've just put this massive wind farm up there. So I need this big interconnected transmission grid to be able to send that energy down to where the load center is. So rather than doing the 60 gigawatt wind farm, now we can do smaller, lots of wind farms, generators, nuclear, small modular reactors, and we can start to build community in and around smaller generation bases. And this comes back to Brendan Quidham, I think, is the gentleman, wrote a really, really good article a few years ago how Bitcoin is a pioneer species. Bitcoin is a pioneer species, and it can actually demonetize real estate in the way that real estate generally, big cities generally started to center in and around transport. So access to rivers, access to shipping, that's where, and energy centers. So this is where cities started to build out. Now, it's not very profitable or economical for you to go out in the middle of the desert and start your own community out there because you don't have access to all those resources. But one of the things that Bitcoin mining solves is the energy piece. So you can potentially now have small generators and small grids start to build out. And we're seeing this in Africa, in Malawi, with gridless. They're starting to partner with these where there is an energy source, but it's been uneconomical to build in the past. They're partnering up with these hydro generators where there's a stream, be able to divert that stream, run it through a hydro generator, share in the profit, generate Bitcoin in real time, turn that wasted energy into a monetary good, and then use the monetary good to go and build out the grid. And they're starting to connect these little sort of mud hut villages, for want of a better term, and the economic growth that that's starting to see in those villages is absolutely astounding. They're now able to have a shop where they have refrigeration, they can sell meat, they can have a butcher, they can have all of these things that they weren't able to do in the past because they didn't have access to energy. And if you scale that back up into like a country like Australia, Austria, you can then start to tap into some of those unrealized real estate areas potentially over time. Tap into the energy resources that are there, whether that is hydro, solar, wind, or we're starting to see small modular reactors, and you can actually start to share and build out smaller community and then mine Bitcoin. And it's all done through being able to tap into and utilize the maximum profitable operating region of these generators. That's what it always comes down to, is where's the maximum profitable operating region for that generator, and how do we tap into that to make sure we're turning that energy into a monetary good.
So in a way, it helps to decentralize and stabilize the grid, the energy grid.
Absolutely.
I love that. That's an amazing. I think we always talk about how to get Bitcoin in more facet of our lives, and I think that angle is probably the best one to describe it to other politicians and decision makers, because it seems to only have advantages. You can monetize one, you can it's renewable, you can really like all those things that politicians care about, the grid stabilization, you can really achieve with Bitcoin mining, and it's amazing to see that. And I know there is in Germany and Austria companies that already do that and talk with politicians and try to really push that, and we have to do this across the world and push it as hard as we can, because Bitcoin mining goes through that image shift all of the sudden right now, where like 2 years ago everyone said like, oh, it's so bad for the environment, and now we're kind of those voices really get silent, more silent, and now we're getting to the other side of like, where can we use Bitcoin mining to actually better our energy grids, to be more efficient and actually benefit the environment in the end of the day. So I love that narrative shift. It's amazing, and we're finally coming closer to the truth. And I'm actually kind of seeing even like mainstream media kind of getting in that direction slowly. I don't know how much BlackRock ETF and president talking about it, and mainstream politicians coming in the scene has to do with that, probably a lot. But yeah, it's great to see that this narrative kind of slowly opens up to being more friendly towards Bitcoin.
And I think the other thing which is really understated and misunderstood is its ability to fix the problems that have already started to creep into grids. So one of the things that's not very well known is that the more renewables you put into a grid, the more problems that it actually introduces. And this is all around rotating machines. So rotating machines are a fundamental part of a grid, okay? So a rotating machine is basically just a big flywheel. It's a big, mostly coal or gas-fired generators or nuclear generators. It's basically heat generating steam in a turbine, spinning a big flywheel in a magnetic field. And that's how you produce electricity. Now, the important thing around this big mass spinning around in this magnetic field is it creates two things. Well, one is it's the stability of the grid. It's the heartbeat of the grid, okay? It sets the frequency of the grid. So in Australia, it's 50 hertz. US, it's 60 hertz. Most of Europe's combination, 50 hertz, 60 hertz, are all around the world. But that 50 hertz is really, really important to maintain. And we only have a finite band in and around that 50 hertz setting to be able to play with, because machines don't like it. Okay, so if we have too much uncontrolled generation out on a electricity grid, which we experience this on the daily basis in Australia. We call it the duck curve effect. I might just share a little image with you on the screen. Yeah, cool. So we're talking about the duck curve effect. So too much uncontrolled generation. And that's typically now what we're starting to see in most grids globally. We're starting to see too much rooftop solar, which is uncontrolled solar. And then we're starting to see obviously more wind and renewables. So uncontrollable, unpredictable, not necessarily reliable. But the most important thing, this is not hyperbole, it actually does put real world effects on the grid. So we're speaking a little bit just about rotating machines and this notion of stability and the frequency that a rotating machine provides a grid is to set that heartbeat for that grid. Now, when you've got too much uncontrolled generation, like we're seeing with this duck curve effect, and we're seeing this globally, anywhere that has a real lot of solar, we're starting to see this duck curve effect. And what you can see is what we're seeing here is a graph, and it's got obviously looks like a duck, and that's why they call it the duck curve effect. But we're starting to see more and more ingress of solar. So you can see each year we're just getting more and more penetration of the solar. But what this really represents is through that period of the day where we've got a lot of solar, we're starting to have too much generation and not enough load. So this graph doesn't really represent it, but the pattern's very true in most of these grids. And in Queensland in particular, we're really starting to see so much generation and not enough load that it's starting to have an impact on our heartbeat for the grid. It's actually starting to have an impact on that rotating machine. It's actually starting to make our heartbeat race. We're actually getting too much generation, not enough load, and your heartbeat starts to speed up. And I spoke before, we've only got a finite band between safe operation before equipment starts blowing up. Everything's set for 50 hertz. Everything's built for 50 hertz in Australia. All you have to be is 52 hertz plus, and we start to see really drastic effects on the grid. So when you have too much of this uncontrolled generation, not enough load, that's really what we're experiencing. There's not enough load through the day. Everyone's at work. We've got so much generation now that and these rotating machines, they need a lot of load. Like the older machines needed, upwards of 50% of load to be of their rated capacity to be actually operating at optimal efficiency without causing too much undue duress and stress on that machine, without introducing too much maintenance that needed to be done, like glazing of bores and all these sorts of things. When you're talking about like diesel generators, that's probably something most people can relate to. They like load. These rotating machines like load, and when you can't give it enough load, then we start turning these machines off, and that's obviously very, very dramatic for a grid. And one of the biggest impacts on us switching rotating machines off in a grid is we lose inertia. So inertia is this flywheel operating in this magnetic field that actually provides us, when we refer to inertia in a grid, we like fault current. When we have a problem on the network, we make decisions based on our ability to observe fault current. And what provides that fault current is this big flywheel spinning in this magnetic field. When a power line drops down onto the ground or clashes together, it generates fault current. It generates a lot of current, a lot of heat, but that fault current we monitor and we make decisions. So when we see really high levels of current, we just assume that something's wrong and we switch off the network. When we we rely on these rotating machines to be able to provide the inertia, to provide the rotation in that magnetic field, to be able to push that fault current in those bad conditions. And when we have too much of this generation, we're starting to turn off these rotating machines, and it leads to a non-stable and non-reliable grid. So when people, it's easy to say, you hear it all the time, like renewables, introduces instability and it's not reliable. That's the reason for it. There's actually science behind it. There's actually a reason behind why people say that and it's misunderstood, that you need load. And that's, again, where Bitcoin miners can fix this problem. So we've already gone down this route of giving everyone rebates to go and put all these solar panels on their roof. So we've got to fix the problem. There's a real world problem created mostly by poor government policies. to go out and we can understand the reason. We want to reduce people's consumer bills, but at the end of the day, it still costs the same to produce. They still want the grid. They still want the grid connection. It still costs us the same to maintain that grid. So it's actually driven the base layer prices for energy up because we still have to maintain it. Now, when we've got too much generation, not enough load, that's where the Bitcoin mining comes into play. So we can soak up the belly of the duck curve. We can bring it back up to an equilibrium level, back up to where it's safe and effective operation of our rotating machines, because we need those rotating machines. We can't simply turn them on.
I love that. So like what I understand is like that belly of duck is where everyone is at work and don't use the things at home. Then everyone comes home, turns on lights, turns on the heating, turns on the TV, turns on internet more. Like that's where like most of the electricity is then used at like starting from like 7 p.m. to like 9-10 p.m. stuff like that. Where then at like 12 p.m. people go to bed again, where it goes lower. It's really interesting. I never thought about that. That's an interesting one. And then
you nailed it. That's where we introduce the Bitcoin miners through the day. We soak up the belly. And then at nighttime, when you need it, because that's the maximum demand, and we don't want to be competing with the maximum demand. So, and that's where at scale, where we want to introduce load at scale, the only thing that can do that in a flexible way is Bitcoin miners. You can't do it with AI data centers. You can't do it with aluminium smelters or steel mills. The only thing that you can do it at scale, quickly, efficiently, and flexibly is Bitcoin mining.
Interesting. That's amazing. That's an amazing point that again makes it so clear that we need Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. We are already far above the time, but one topic, because you mentioned it, and I'm really curious about it, what I want to get into is the fast reading aspect of what you have mentioned. Maybe we can quickly touch on that before we get to the end routine. What did you do there? Like, how did you get more information in a small amount of time in your head?
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I can wrap that up pretty quickly. So I went down I was just getting like more and more books on my bookshelf that I wanted to read, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. I didn't seem to be making any headway into tapping into all these books, and it was just too many on my to read list. So I tried to teach myself how to speed read, and there's a number of techniques that you can do, and mostly it's easier to do with a physical book, not necessarily Kindles or e-readers, but I was looking at a number of different techniques to try and introduce or improve my reading speed. So bringing in the margins, using your finger to trace, being conscious of your eyes darting back, rereading the same passages. But one of the things they talk about is to turn off your inner monologue. So when you read, are you verbalizing and you're reading it to yourself in your head? They call that the inner monologue. And that's something that I found I couldn't switch off easily. I like to verbalize. Without it, I'm not really getting a lot of comprehension, and I struggled to turn that off. So one thing I discovered was that at the time I was reading a lot on Kindle, and I don't tend to resonate with audiobooks. I can listen to a podcast and listen to it at 2 times speed, pay attention, get a lot of attention. But with an audiobook, it's different. I have to be present. Otherwise my mind drifts, and then I realize I'm 2 chapters deep and I haven't listened to a word that they've said, so I have to go back. So I waste a lot of time with audiobooks. But what I discovered was that if I'm reading the Kindle book and at checkout, I can add the WhisperSync version, the audible version of that same book to the checkout. What I learned to do was listen to the narrator while I read the book and then speed up the narrator. Now, the narrator, that was, I could only do that within finite limits, because the narrator you can only push the narrator as far as how articulate they are when they're speaking. So if they're not very articulate and they don't round their vowels very, very much and not very punctual, then that tends to blur. So what I do is I use an app. I use an app called Voice Dream Reader, and basically it's just a text to voice converter, and it's robot voices, and that do take a little bit of time to get used to, but they are very articulate because they're a robot. So what you can do is over time is train yourself to listen at a faster speed, but the key is to read at the same time. So as you import the book, You train yourself over time, just keep pushing your speed beyond comprehension, then dial it back. Push beyond comprehension, just dial it back. Push beyond comprehension, dial it back. And then over time, you can speed yourself up. Now, this is not me reading for pleasure. It's reading for learning. It's just a deep dive. But basically, you can sit down in one session and consume a whole book. Done it many, many times where, it's a subject matter that you're interested in. Just sit down in one session, like a 300-page book you can chew through in about 2 hours. And with fairly high retention rate. I'm not going to say very high, like as in 100% retention. No, about 80% retention is pretty common. And it's just one way that you can consume a lot of content really quickly. And it's good for studying if you're at uni or whatever. You've got to chew through the textbook. There's just a tome of information you've got to get through. It's just a great way of being able to absorb a lot of information very quickly.
That's amazing. That strategy. Currently I'm only listening, and I'm only doing as a kind of pause, like as a break. So I have the speed of like maybe 1 or 2 books a month. So like really slow. I mean, kind of slow, like 1-2 weeks, 1-2 books a month. I don't know how many you do, but I do like it as a kind of a change of scenes. I also don't do any Bitcoin books or anything related to that. I usually try to go out of that scene. I don't do any pleasure readings for like novels or fiction, stuff like that. I never did that actually. I should try it once, and I never did that. I have to see how it goes with that also. But yeah, we have one question that each and every one of my guests get before we come to the end routine, and it is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
The hustle, I think, probably more than anything, is I'm a part-time guitarist and singer, and I think more than anything, I think most people are getting to a point in their lives where they need more income. Right. And what I mean by the hustle is just finding something that you're passionate about, that you're good at. Everyone's got a skill or an interest, and there are ways that you can monetize that interest. Like obviously gigging, playing guitar and singing is probably a little bit easier than some others, but I do encourage people to try and tap into that, because there are ways that you can generate income and generate a side hustle, generate even passive income out of your passions. And to really hone into that. So I think that's probably something that I share quite openly with a lot of friends and family, in and around ways in which they can shift the needle for themselves, particularly if you're stuck in a job that you don't particularly like, or you've only got a certain set of skills in terms of being able to work, and you can't put more effort into your work to get overtime and all that sort of thing. There are industries that's not a possibility. But if you are in a situation where you want to make change for yourself, to increase income, is focus on your passion and try and turn that into something that you can make money out of.
That's amazing. I never was focused on that, but I kind of did that with the podcast. But yeah, like it's an amazing thing to do, and something everyone should at least try to do and follow the things. Thank you so much for that. We have an end routine of the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is, what is the moral impact of Bitcoin?
What is the moral impact of Bitcoin? That's a really good one. I think it's bringing people back to truth. It's really starting to, any Bitcoiner you meet, you generally get on with very well. And I think it tends to be because morally we see the world in very similar ways. And I think it's starting to really fix this notion about what it means to be human. Like we talk about praxeology and all these things a lot, but really from its fundamental level, with its whole, low time preference, all these things are starting to really resonate about what it actually means to be human. And I think when you focus in on providing value, being a good human, I think it just fixes us as humanity. It just makes us interact with each other in a non-extractive way.
And that's a good thing to think about. Like it makes it brings us closer to how humans actually, like the fiat is kind of intruding on our lives, and it's kind of manipulating of how we act with fiat money, and Bitcoin kind of brings us back to that. I like that explanation. It's a really good one. Perfect. And thank you so much, Daz, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, best ways on Noster at Daz, D-A-Z, on Twitter at Daz Bea, D-A-Z-B-E-A, and Looking Glass Education, where you'll find a whole host of free education resources, including some courses. And finally, B is for Bitcoin. Myself and Seb Bunny published a book written for wage earners, really distilling down Bitcoin. Helps with that conviction, right? We spoke about that a bit earlier, how it works in layman's terms, trying to distill down what is otherwise a very complex subject into easy to understand language. So you'll find that on self-publishing on Amazon or the Infinity Bookstore with Knut and Luke. You'll find that published over there, as well as the Free Madeira Foundation. Have got a bookstore now as well. You'll find Beers for Bitcoin available there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Daz, for being on. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.